On the morning of August 6, 1945, inside the Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo, a single decoded message from Hiroshima would destroy 3 years of carefully built lies about modern warfare. What Japan's military leaders read in that telegram forced them to face a truth they had denied throughout the entire conflict. The United States hadn't been fighting with everything they had. They'd been holding their strength back. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace, 90 feet underground, sat a war room protected by concrete walls 4 feet thick. That August morning, the space buzzed with the usual sounds of a war Japan was losing. Field Marshal Shinroku Hata's daily intelligence briefing had turned into a routine of managing slow collapse. Then, at exactly 8:15, Lieutenant Colonel Tishi Yamamoto burst through the steel door without even bowing first. He held a decoded message that would completely change how Japan's commanders understood the war they'd been fighting. The telegram was incomplete, sent by Hiroshima's regional military command just before all communication stopped. Entire city wiped out by one bomb. Explosion zone bigger than any previous attack. Don't know what kind of weapon. Deaths beyond counting. Need help immediately. The message cut off mid-sentence. General Yoshiro Umezu, head of the Imperial General Staff, read it 3 times. At first, he assumed American bombers had carried out their biggest conventional raid yet, maybe 500 planes dropping firebombs all at once. The number seemed impossible any other way. Hiroshima held 350,000 people across 27 square miles. But more reports coming in throughout the morning told a completely different story. Weather scouts had spotted only 3 B-29s over Hiroshima that morning. 3 planes, not 300. Just 3. Admiral Suimu Toyota, head of the naval staff, stood before the huge wall map showing every known American military position in the Pacific. His intelligence team had gotten very good at predicting what the Americans would do. They knew bomber group sizes, typical bomb loads, and how much damage to expect. Nothing in 3 years of air raids suggested 3 aircraft could wipe out an entire city. By 10 o'clock, scout planes trying to reach Hiroshima reported something they'd never seen before. Pilots described a mushroom-shaped cloud climbing over 40,000 feet, visible from 150 miles away. The cloud glowed with strange colors, purples and oranges that seemed to pulse with their own light. Foreign Minister Shigenori. Togo got the first eyewitness report at 11:30 from a railroad worker who'd been 15 miles outside Hiroshima. The man's account, written down by Togo's secretary, described a flash brighter than 1,000 suns, followed by a shock wave that knocked trains off their rails. He said the entire city center had simply disappeared, replaced by a firestorm visible from the mountains. The afternoon meeting of the Supreme War Council started at 2 o'clock in total silence. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki, who'd survived several murder attempts just for suggesting peace talks, read through all the reports. His hands shook slightly as he put the papers down. "Gentlemen," Suzuki started, "we need to think about what this means." General Korochika Anami, the war minister and strongest voice for continuing the fight, spoke first. "American lies. They want us to think they have weapons they don't actually possess. Hiroshima was destroyed by normal bombing, and they're using tricks to 3 aircraft, Admiral Toyota cut him off, something he'd never have done under normal circumstances. 3 aircraft, Anami. Our radar followed them. Our watchers saw them. 3. The room went quiet as everyone grasped what this meant. For 3 years, Japan's military thinking had rested on one basic idea. American industrial power could be beaten by Japanese spiritual strength and smart tactics. The Americans could build more ships, more planes, more tanks. But Japanese forces would fight so fiercely that American deaths would become too much for their politicians to handle. This thinking had guided every choice since Pearl Harbor. When American factories built 300,000 aircraft, Japan's leaders told themselves that Japanese pilots, though outnumbered, would fight with 10 times the spirit. When American shipyards launched cargo ships so fast they outpaced German submarines sinking them, Japan comforted itself that American sailors lacked the warrior's soul. But a single bomb that could destroy a city pointed to something far more disturbing. It showed that American industrial and scientific power had reached levels that made Japanese resistance not just hard, but pointless. It showed that America had been building secret weapons while also fighting a war across two oceans. It showed that everything Japan's military leadership believed about modern warfare was outdated. Intelligence Officer Colonel Hideaki Sato gave the afternoon's analysis at 4 o'clock. His team had been tracking American industrial output since 1941, and their figures had been consistently, frighteningly right. America had built 88,410 tanks during the war. Japan had built 6,450. America had constructed 41 aircraft carriers. Japan had built 15. American shipyards launched cargo ships so quickly they outpaced German submarines, sinking them. But Sato's new calculations suggested something that completely broke their understanding. If, he said, voice barely louder than a whisper, if the Americans can wipe out whole cities with single bombs, then they have scientific abilities that make number comparisons meaningless. They're not fighting the same kind of war we're fighting. Foreign Minister Togo added what everyone was thinking but nobody wanted to say. And if they have one bomb like this, we have to assume they have more. Japan's understanding of American power had been shaped by a set of carefully built beliefs that started long before Pearl Harbor. These beliefs, recorded in countless staff meetings and strategic reviews, would all crumble within days of Hiroshima. But to grasp what the High Command finally realized, you first need to understand what they'd convinced themselves was true. In November 1941, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Combined Fleet, had given the most accurate assessment of American industrial strength that any Japanese leader would offer during the whole war. His warning, written in naval records, was clear. I can fight wildly for 6 months or a year, but I have no confidence at all for the second or third year. Yamamoto had lived in America. He'd studied at Harvard and worked as a naval officer in Washington. He'd toured American factories and seen the industrial base with his own eyes. His numbers weren't based on hope or nationalism, but on cold math. America's steel production alone was bigger than Japan's entire industrial output. American oil reserves were basically unlimited compared to Japan's dangerous dependence on imports, but Yamamoto's warnings were completely ignored by the very staff now sitting underground thinking about Hiroshima's destruction. The Army's planning documents from 1941, found in archives after the war, showed the different story that military leaders had accepted. American industrial might would be canceled out by three things. First, distance. Japan's conquests would create a defensive zone so huge that American supply lines would break under their own weight. Every ship, every plane, every bullet would need to travel 5,000 miles across dangerous ocean before reaching battle. Japan could supply its forces from nearby conquered lands, while America wore itself out with impossible supply chains. Second, morale. American society was soft, individualistic, and couldn't handle heavy losses. Japanese military thinking assumed that after losing 30 to 40,000 men, American public opinion would demand peace talks. The Japanese soldiers' willingness to die would outlast America's willingness to fight. Third, tactical superiority. Japanese forces, through better training, warrior spirit, and smart tactics, would create casualty rates that made American number advantages meaningless. One Japanese soldier would equal 3 to 4 Americans in combat. Skill. These assumptions had been tested and proven wrong at every single battle in the Pacific War. Yet Japanese High Command had consistently twisted defeats into proof that their theories just needed small adjustments rather than complete rethinking. At Midway in June 1942, Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers in one day. The official review blamed bad luck and tactical mistakes, not American code-breaking skills or the basic weakness of Japan's carrier-focused approach. The core assumption that Japanese forces could overcome number disadvantages stayed unchanged. At Guadalcanal from August 1942 to February 1943, Japanese forces discovered that Americans could maintain supply lines across vast distances and could match Japanese soldiers in jungle fighting. The official review blamed local commanders for not having enough fighting spirit, not the impossibility of the strategic situation. The core assumption that American society would crack under steady losses stayed unchanged. By August 1945, every major assumption had been systematically crushed by reality, yet senior leadership had never formally admitted this. General Anami's continued push for fighting to the last citizen represented not stupidity, but the logical end of beliefs that had never been properly challenged. The afternoon of August 6th marked the first time in the entire war that Japan's Supreme War Council faced their delusions directly. Intelligence. Colonel Sato presented what he called the reality report, a document his team had put together over the past 6 months, but had been stopped from presenting until now. The numbers were crushing. American aircraft production in 1944 alone beat Japan's total production for the entire war. American shipyards were building escort carriers faster than Japan could train pilots. American ammunition plants produced more shells in a week than Japan's factories produced in a month. But Sato's most damaging statistics involved scientific research. His intelligence network had documented American research centers employing over 130,000 scientists and engineers working on military technology. Japan's similar effort employed about 6,000. American research universities, Harvard, MIT, Berkeley, Chicago had bigger physics departments than Japan's entire scientific community. The atomic bomb, Sato explained, needed facilities that we couldn't have built, even if we'd known how. The Americans built entire cities in secret: Oak Ridge, Tennessee; Hanford, Washington; Los Alamos, New Mexico. These places used more electricity than major Japanese cities. They employed 130,000 workers. The Manhattan Project cost $2 billion, more than Japan spent on its entire war effort in 1944. Foreign Minister Togo asked the question that would echo through later war crimes trials and historical studies. How could we not know? Sato's answer was uncomfortable but true. We knew, Foreign Minister. Our intelligence services reported on American industrial growth constantly. We caught communications about huge secret projects. We recorded their scientific hiring efforts. But every report was dismissed as exaggeration or propaganda. We chose not to know because knowing would mean admitting we couldn't win. Admiral Toyota added his own bitter judgment. The Americans, he said, fought this war with one hand tied behind their back. They fought Germany and Japan at the same time while creating weapons we can't understand. They produced more war material than we thought physically possible while keeping their civilian economy at levels above peacetime production. They're not just stronger than us. They're operating at a different level of civilization. This admission that America represented not just greater strength, but a different category of ability, marked the basic shift in understanding. For 4 years, Japanese propaganda had painted Americans as materialistic and weak, dependent on machines because they lacked spiritual strength. The atomic bomb showed this story as catastrophically wrong. The mental impact went beyond simple military math. Cabinet Secretary Hisatsune Sakomizu wrote in his diary that evening, "We've been fighting an enemy we never understood. We assumed they thought like us, that their society worked like ours, that their limits matched our limits. Hiroshima proves we were fighting blind." August 7, 1945 started with proof that made Hiroshima seem even harder to understand. Scout planes that finally got through the radiation zone sent back photos that would reach high command within hours. Major Sune Kitamura, the pilot who flew the first successful scout mission, reported weather he'd never seen. Updrafts so strong they threw his plane 2,000 feet higher in seconds. Air temperatures that broke his instruments. Visibility blocked by smoke rising in a column to the upper atmosphere. The photos, developed by 11 o'clock, showed something military analysts first refused to believe. The city center, about 4 square miles, had been completely flattened. Not destroyed in the normal sense where rubble and building bases remained, but flattened to bare ground. Buildings had been vaporized. The scout team guessed that everything within a mile of ground zero had stopped existing in any recognizable form. Intelligence analysts compared these images to normal bombing results. The most devastating conventional raid of the war, the Tokyo firebombing of March 9th or 10th, 1945, had needed 334 B-29 bombers, dropping 1,665 tons of firebombs over 3 hours. Hiroshima's destruction exceeded that raid's damage. done by one bomb from one plane in one instant. The Supreme War Council met again at 2 o'clock on August 7th with new intelligence that completely changed the strategic picture. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov had called Japanese Ambassador Naotake Sato to the Kremlin at midnight Moscow time. The message was short. The Soviet Union would consider itself at war with Japan starting August 9, 1945. This news destroyed Japan's final strategic hope. For months, Japanese diplomacy had worked desperately to get Soviet help with peace terms. The dream was that Stalin, never fully trusted by his American and British partners, might arrange a deal that kept some Japanese territory and stopped occupation. The Soviets entering the war killed this possibility completely. General Anami's face, according to several witnesses, went pale as he grasped the implications. Japan now faced enemies on every side with no chance of negotiated peace. American atomic weapons from the east, Soviet armies from the north, British Commonwealth forces from the south, and Chinese resistance continuing in occupied lands. The empire that had once stretched from the edge of India to the Middle Pacific was being squeezed back toward the home islands with crushing force. Foreign Minister Togo laid out the harsh reality. We have three choices. Surrender without conditions, fight until every city is destroyed by atomic weapons, or fight until Soviet and American forces invade and Japan stops existing as a nation. There are no other options. August 8th brought scattered intelligence about Soviet movements. The Red Army had launched a massive attack into Manchuria with overwhelming force. The Kwantung Army, once the elite unit of Japanese military power, was being systematically destroyed. Soviet tank columns pushed 50 miles on the first day, meeting resistance that collapsed before forces that had learned their skills destroying Nazi Germany. The Manchurian operation showed another uncomfortable truth about American power. The Soviets were equipped with thousands of American vehicles, trucks, and communication gear provided through Lend-Lease. American industrial capacity had not only sustained its own forces across two oceans, but had also equipped allies on a scale that seemed impossible by Japanese standards. A single American program, Lend-Lease, had provided more material to Soviet forces than Japan's entire industrial output for the war. At 2 minutes past 11 on August 9th, a second atomic bomb destroyed Nagasaki. The message from Nagasaki Regional Command was even shorter than Hiroshima's. Second atomic attack. City destroyed. Deaths beyond counting. Then silence. The Supreme War Council emergency session that afternoon descended into something never seen in Japanese military protocol. Open admission of complete strategic failure. Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai spoke with remarkable honesty for a military officer in that setting. The Americans have shown they can destroy our cities whenever they want, one by one until nothing's left. They've shown they can keep doing this forever. We can't defend against weapons we can't detect until they explode. Our anti-aircraft systems are useless. Our fighter planes can't stop what they can't find. Our civil defense plans are meaningless. Army Chief of Staff General Umezu added his own assessment, one that would have been considered defeatist heresy weeks earlier. The atomic bomb changes basic military thinking. Grouped forces become targets. Cities become targets. Our plan of fighting to the last citizen assumes Americans must invade to occupy. But if they can destroy cities without invasion, our entire defensive strategy becomes outdated. They can simply erase Japan from existence without ever landing on our soil. Intelligence estimates presented. That evening figured America likely had between 3 and 7 more atomic bombs with the ability to make more. Even if this guess was high, even if America had only one more weapon, the strategic meaning stayed the same. Continued resistance meant suicide. Cabinet Secretary Sakomizu recorded the Emperor's private words from a meeting that evening. His Majesty said that the unbearable must be borne. The atomic bombs have shown that continued resistance will lead to the complete destruction of the Japanese people. We must accept terms that preserve the nation, even if those terms are painful beyond words. The phrase, "the unbearable must be borne," would become the foundation for Japan's surrender announcement. But the path from this private imperial acceptance to actual surrender would require dealing with military opposition that stayed fierce despite overwhelming proof. August 10th brought the formal Japanese surrender offer, sent through Swiss diplomatic channels. The message came with a condition. Japan would accept the Potsdam Declaration terms as long as the emperor's sovereignty was kept. The American response, delivered August 12th, was deliberately unclear. The emperor would answer to the supreme commander of Allied powers, but his final status would be decided by the freely expressed will of the Japanese people. This vagueness created the final crisis. Military hardliners led by General Anami saw this as unacceptable. They argued for continuing resistance despite atomic weapons. Their position was no longer based on winning, but on protecting national honor through destruction, rather than accepting occupation and foreign judgment. The surrender formalities stretched through late August and early September 1945. But the mental transformation of Japanese high command was complete by August 16th. What followed was not just military defeat, but a complete rethinking of everything Japanese leadership had believed about modern warfare, industrial capacity, and their own place in the world. The formal surrender ceremony aboard USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, brought Japanese representatives face-to-face with the physical reality of American power they'd consistently underestimated. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, who signed the surrender document, recorded his thoughts in his diary. The harbor was filled with American warships as far as you could see. Hundreds of ships. Aircraft filled the sky in formations that blocked the sun. The Americans showed their power not through threats, but through simple presence. This fleet represented a fraction of their total military force, yet beat everything Japan had at the peak of our strength. General Yoshijiro Umezu, representing the Imperial General Staff, noted the ceremony's location was itself a lesson in American capability. We surrendered aboard a battleship built in American shipyards in less time than it took us to plan a single naval operation. The Missouri was one of dozens of capital ships they built, while at the same time fighting across 2 oceans and creating atomic weapons. We prepared for war for a decade. They prepared for 15 months and buried us. The American occupation force started arriving in late August, and Japanese military watchers recorded details that reinforced their new understanding. The equipment, organization, and supply chains showed capabilities that previous intelligence reports had accurately described, but high command had refused to believe. A single American infantry division moved with more trucks than the entire Imperial Army owned. American supply operations delivered fresh food to troops while Japanese forces had been starving. American medical centers treated injuries that Japanese military medicine thought untreatable. Intelligence Colonel Sato put together his final report in September 1945, titled "Why We Lost: An Assessment of Strategic Miscalculation." The document, now kept in Japan's National Institute for Defense Studies, offered brutal honesty. We lost the war in December 1941 when we attacked an enemy we didn't understand. Every battle after that was just the working out of unavoidable math. American industrial capacity beat ours by factors of 10 to 20 in every category. Their scientific community was larger than our entire educated population. Their resource base was basically unlimited, while ours depended on conquests we couldn't maintain. We fought believing spirit could beat material. We were wrong. The American Occupation Administration, led by General Douglas MacArthur, gave Japanese officials access to information about American war production that confirmed their worst realizations. The United States had produced 88,410 tanks, 257,000 artillery pieces, 2,434,000 trucks, 17 million rifles, and 41 billion rounds of ammunition. More stunning, they did this while keeping civilian living standards above Japanese peacetime prosperity. Former Prime Minister Suzuki, in talks recorded by American occupation historians, expressed what Japanese leadership had finally grasped. We thought we were fighting a nation of merchants who valued profit over honor, comfort over sacrifice. We were catastrophically wrong. We were fighting the most productive civilization in human history, one that could at the same time maintain a mass consumer economy and total war production. They didn't choose between butter and guns. They made both in amounts we found impossible to understand. The Manhattan Project's details, slowly revealed to Japanese scientists through occupation channels, provided the most humbling lesson. The project had employed 130,000 people and cost $2 billion, more than Japan's entire 1944 military budget. It needed facilities that used more electricity than major cities. It involved theoretical physics at levels Japanese scientists hadn't thought possible. The atomic bomb wasn't just a weapon, but proof of scientific and industrial capacity that put America in a different category of civilization. Admiral Toyoda's final assessment, written in 1946 for occupation historians, captured the complete reversal of Japanese military thinking. We started the war believing American democracy made them weak. Their diversity made them divided. Their wealth made them soft. We ended the war understanding that democracy enabled innovation, diversity provided talent, and wealth funded capabilities we couldn't match. Every assumption we held was not just wrong, but exactly backwards. The mental impact on military leadership showed up in different ways. Some, like General Anami, chose death rather than living with the reality of how badly they'd miscalculated. Others, like Admiral Yonai, became supporters of complete demilitarization, arguing that Japan's militaristic culture had led to catastrophic strategic blindness. Most simply struggled to match the warriors they believed themselves to be with the reality that they'd led their nation into an unwinnable war through systematic self-deception. Japanese historians working under occupation supervision started documenting how completely intelligence reports had been ignored. Accurate assessments of American production had been dismissed as defeatism. Warnings about American scientific abilities had been buried as harmful to morale. Evidence that Japan was losing the war had been reinterpreted as temporary setbacks needing more fighting spirit. The entire command structure had created an information environment where truth became treason and optimism became policy. The final lesson Japanese high command absorbed was perhaps the most bitter. American power had not been fully used. The United States had fought a two-ocean war while keeping substantial forces in reserve, creating next-generation weapons and preparing for conflicts that might come next. The atomic bombs represented not America's maximum effort, but what they could do while at the same time doing a dozen other things. Japanese forces had fought with total commitment of every resource. American forces had fought with comfortable margins everywhere. By 1947, when American occupation officials did comprehensive interviews with former Japanese military leadership, the transformation was complete. General Umezu's testimony to occupation historians summed up what Japanese high command had finally understood. We lost because we never understood our enemy. We gave them our weaknesses, limited resources, narrow industrial base, rigid thinking, when they had the opposite. We believed our own propaganda when we should have believed our intelligence services. The atomic bomb wasn't the cause of our defeat. It was the final proof that we'd been defeated from the moment we started fighting an enemy we never truly understood. We learned too late that courage can't beat chemistry, spirit can't overcome steel, and determination means nothing when facing an enemy who has both determination and 10 times your capacity to give it physical form.